I am publishing my memories of Srila Prabhupada when I have so few of them. I joined ISKCON in 1975 when Srila Prabhupada was established as a great world Acharya, and ISKCON had many branches worldwide. There was no, at that time Prabhupada had several thousand disciples, and there was no, Prabhupada had several thousand disciples, of who a few had ready personal access to him. For the rank and file devotees, there was no question of just walking up to Prabhupada and talking to him in a very familiar way. We were informed by our leaders that Prabhupada didn't want to be disturbed with many petty or many ordinary questions that could be answered by his senior disciples, and that he was very busy traveling and preaching and wanted to have as much time as possible free for his book translation, his most important work. So we all respected that. We were told also that by serving Prabhupada, especially by distributing his books, he would be pleased. So we all respected that, and we did get Prabhupada's personal association by seeing him in classes and darshans. In this way he gave his association, his personal association, freely to everybody. And he told that what we heard many times, that serving the Vani is more important than serving the Vapu. So, for this reason, even though I saw Prabhupada several times before he passed away on November the 14th, 1977, I don't have many personal memories of Srila Prabhupada. In fact, I was only in the room alone with him once when he gave me my Gayatri initiation, and he told me the Gayatri mantra. However, it is not that because my memories of Srila Prabhupada are few, that they are insignificant. Everything Prabhupada said and did is of unlimited significance. Especially, of course, to me, the things that I personally heard Prabhupada say and saw him do have special significance for me. Also, many devotees ask me about my personal memories of Srila Prabhupada, so whatever I may have to say, they see them as being significant. Otherwise, why would they ask? The fact that they are so eager to hear what Srila Prabhupada testifies to the greatness of Srila Prabhupada. That, as an ISKCON sannyasi and a direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada, I am honored and respected by devotees everywhere, especially those who never personally saw Srila Prabhupada, who joined this movement after his departure. That also testifies to the greatness of Prabhupada. People respect me or any other Prabhupada disciple because of our relationship with Prabhupada. Otherwise, before meeting Prabhupada, we were all ordinary people. We were all destined for the lower species of life. But Prabhupada saved us. We should never forget that we are all made of Prabhupada's mercy. As much as we remember this and go on boldly and enthusiastically propagating his mission, that much the Krishna conscious movement will be successful. And as much as we forget from where or through whom the potency to spread Krishna consciousness is coming, that much if we forget through whom the potency for spreading Krishna consciousness is coming, we will simply have to suffer due to not linking properly with the source of all our blessings. Yet another reason for publishing my memories of Srila Prabhupada, even though they be so few, is to encourage other devotees who have personal memories of Srila Prabhupada to publish their personal memories of Srila Prabhupada. Many devotees had extensive association with Prabhupada. Others had less, and others still, like myself, very little. But if everyone publishes their book, if everyone publishes their memories, then we will have a vast treasure house of anecdotes of Srila Prabhupada that will be instructive, informative, and enlivening to all. Therefore, by publishing this little booklet, I would also like to encourage all devotees to also publish their memories of Srila Prabhupada, even those who have very few memories. If there are many such devotees like that, they all publish their memories, then together their contribution will be significant, not only in quality. In quality, automatically they're significant, but in quantity also. If many devotees come together, what to speak of those devotees who had many hours and days and months and years of association with Prabhupada. I first met Srila Prabhupada in the form of one of his books, Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Volume 2, with shockingly bright and colorful cover. and a beautiful picture of Krishna and Balaram on the cover, and a not less beautiful picture of Srila Prabhupada on the back. About 2 years earlier to that, I had first seen Srila Prabhupada's books. My best friend at school had bought some books from devotees in Oxford Street. He wanted to show them to me, but I didn't even want to look, saying that all these Indian Swamis are all cheaters. But by this time, somehow or other, my attitude had changed, and I was ready to not only look at the book, but read it in a submissive spirit. I didn't understand much of the book. I found much of the language difficult. And the Indian proper names I found a little difficult to... Unfamiliarity with the Indian proper names also made it somewhat difficult reading. But there was one instruction that Prabhupada gave in there which I started to follow, at least in a very small way, which was to chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. After reading that book, I decided to visit the devotees. Therefore, I next met Srila Prabhupada in the form of his devotees and his movement. I was fortunate enough to be accepted into the community of devotees at Bhaktivedanta Mana near London in April 1975. To say that I met Prabhupada in the form of his devotees is not simply, what's the word for that, euphemism, a kind of nice saying. But actually the devotees at that time were always talking about Srila Prabhupada very happily, with great reverence and faith and affection. They would teach me philosophy and practical things too, saying that Srila Prabhupada said this, he said to do like that. It was very exciting. Prabhupada was traveling all over the world, and we get news Prabhupada is now here, he's going there. Mostly devotees going from America to India or wherever Prabhupada was, going or coming. In that time, particularly, our movement was very much dominated by America and American devotees. They would generally come through London. So we would often get news of devotees who had been with Prabhupada just a few days previously, and we'd get all the latest news. In those days there was not so much communication by phone. Prabhupada discouraged the use of much international phone calls, and there was no calm or fax. So when a devotee came through who had information of Prabhupada, what exciting things Prabhupada had said, what new books, what new books he was writing, some revelation he had made, some new plan for spreading Krishna consciousness, some chastisement or encouragement, some wonderful thing, some wonderful pastime. Always devotees. I'm talking about Prabhupada, and they're always in our temples, or in our traveling Sankirtan buses. We only heard cassettes of Prabhupada speaking or chanting. The whole movement was saturated with Prabhupada consciousness. That summer, so I started worshipping Prabhupada, respecting him as my guru. Of course, in those days there was only one guru in ISKCON, Prabhupada. I didn't know much about what it meant to be a disciple, but anyway, Prabhupada was my guru, and we were all disciples of Prabhupada, and it was like this going on for some time. And somehow I was told that Prabhupada came from time to time, but when I heard that Prabhupada was coming, I really didn't know what to expect. The news came that Prabhupada was coming that summer. It came a few days before he was scheduled to arrive, and the excitement that spread through the temple, the way everyone got lifted up, and then devoted just before Prabhupada, we heard Prabhupada was in Paris or somewhere else in Europe, then he arrived. And devotees have been cleaning up, painting, everything at Bhakti. Now, as far as I remember, Prabhupada came once in the summer of 1975 and once in the summer of 1976. But I'm not quite sure if he came in 76. I have to check that up. But I think he did. And if so, then the incidents of 75 and 76 are getting mixed up in my mind. Maybe he only came in 75. I'll have to check that out. Anyway, what happened was practically all the devotees went out to the airport to meet Prabhupada. And we were at Heathrow Airport, and we were doing kirtan. As far as I remember, Prabhupada was supposed to arrive, then he cancelled it till a day later. Then when he arrived, somehow or other we were chanting and waiting and waiting and waiting, and all of a sudden, Harikesh Maharaj came out. At that time he was still a brahmachari, and told us that we had been waiting at the wrong terminal, that Prabhupada had already arrived and he had already left for the manor. So it was anticlimatically. We were supposed to meet Prabhupada, have a big kirtan, and then rush back to the manor to again meet him at the manor. But that was all spoiled. So then, we didn't see Prabhupada till the next morning. He was there, and other devotees were seeing him, but even though Prabhupada, somehow it was that it was kind of, like I said, you can't just walk in. Kind of restricted feeling. So anyway, I first saw Prabhupada the next morning when he was coming down the stairs at Bhaktivedanta Manor from his personal quarters to take darshan of the deities. Now, my first impression that went through my head for a split second was rather mundane. You can imagine I was expecting to see Prabhupada, and so many thoughts were there. My first impression was somewhat mundane, because I was surprised that Prabhupada looked so short. Actually, from the physical point of view, Prabhupada was quite short, and especially as he was flanked by Harikesh Maharaj, who is very tall, and Brahmananda Maharaj, who is also quite tall and very big-bodied. So Prabhupada looked physically quite small. That was the first thought that flashed through my mind, because when you hear Prabhupada, how powerfully he's speaking and how he's ordering everyone, he's obviously a very strong personality. So that flashed through my mind for a moment, but then that surprise, and then immediately I adjusted my thoughts, realizing that that was not a proper way to judge one's great spiritual personality from an external point of view. Now when Prabhupada was coming down the stairs, everyone was bowing down, but I didn't, because I thought, let me see Prabhupada. So I looked at Prabhupada, and the first impression also, a very effulgent personality, as if effulgence was coming from his body. Prabhupada was as if he was looking down and he was looking very grave. He was walking slowly and regally. So I looked at him for a few seconds, and then I also bowed down. Then Prabhupada went into the temple room, and many devotees were also waiting in the temple room. Prabhupada walked in very gravely, leaving his slippers at the door. And the kirtan that had been going on, when Prabhupada walked in, that kirtan stopped. And the temple room was full. And the devotees Prabhupada was very grave, and the devotees they also became very grave. And in a mood, the deities were already open, Radha Gokulananda, and in a mood of great awe and reverence, all the devotees bowed down. They left a line in the middle for Prabhupada. They left a line in the middle, an aisle in the middle for Prabhupada to walk through. All of a sudden, all the devotees were down on the ground. I just squeezed in after Prabhupada and so many others went through the door. And Prabhupada walked. I remember standing behind him watching as Prabhupada walked up behind so many devotees. Walked to the front, took darshan. The deities took charanamrita. And I don't remember Prabhupada accepting Guru Puja, although I'm sure he did. Then Prabhupada, I can't remember whether he chanted Jai Radha Madhava first or afterwards, but he was sitting on the Vyasasana in the temple room of Bhaktivedanta Manor. It's a very long temple room. It's a long temple room with a high Vyasasana at the back. So Prabhupada is sitting on a high Vyasasana looking at the deities, and he just looked at the deities without saying anything for quite a long time. Then he started talking about how beautiful the deities were. He was saying some very nectarian things, which I'll have to ask some other devotees who were there at the time if they can remember this also, because it doesn't seem to be in our Bhaktivedanta archives books. Prabhupada was talking about the beauty of the deities. Now, other things that happen in England, I can't remember if it was 75 or 76, maybe it was only 75. Prabhupada, he stayed a few days, and maybe 2 days, 3 days maybe. And I managed to get on one morning walk with him, but he didn't. There was about maybe 30 devotees accompanied him. It seemed that they were discouraging devotees from coming, otherwise there would have been about more than 200 devotees. So someone had told me not to come, but I saw someone else who had been told not to come going anyway, so I also went along. And when I went along, no one made any objection. But Prabhupada didn't say hardly anything on that morning walk. Just he chanted a little japa. And my main memory of that is trying to see Prabhupada at all, because there's so many devotees around him. Mostly they're all much more, very, very senior devotees compared to myself. And I couldn't just barge in the middle of them all. So I was kind of at the outside of the group. Then, I remember Prabhupada gave, I think twice I was in the darshan room, Prabhupada gave a darshan. Now once, I remember this, that his servant, I think it must have been Nanda Kumar, his traveling servant, was sitting in front of Prabhupada chanting his beads. With his beads, he was holding them in both his hands without using a bead bag. So Prabhupada, darshan was going on. There was some questions and answers. His devotees darshan. As far as I remember, it was in the morning. And Prabhupada asked his servant, "Where is your bead bag?" And the servant replied, "It's being washed, Prabhupada." So Prabhupada called to another of his retinue, I think it was Harikesh Maharaj, and told him to give the Nanda Kumar another. He said, "So many bead bags have been given, give one to him." So that bead bag was given. One of Prabhupada's bead bags that he'd received as a gift was given to Nanda Kumar, and Prabhupada said, "You should keep 2 bead bags. Always chant with your beads in a bead bag. When one is being washed, use the other one." Now, I was also present during the famous interview with Mike Robinson of the London Broadcasting Corporation, a radio company, which was held in the Bhaktivedanta Mandir, Srila Prabhupada's darshan room. There are many devotees present during this, and Mike Robinson was very submissive to Prabhupada. Prabhupada was almost trying to push him to use a seat, but he preferred to sit down on the floor in humility before Prabhupada, and his attitude was, in speaking to Prabhupada, was very humble, almost like a disciple. And Prabhupada also dealt with him like that. He'd preach to him almost as if he was a disciple. He was quite strong in the way he spoke with him. Not strong in using harsh words, but the manner. Mike Robinson was there to ask questions, so there's no doubt that Prabhupada was in command of the whole proceedings. I remember also at this time that I noticed how Mukunda Goswami, how he was also very close to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was dealing with him very personally. I didn't realize at that time because Mukunda kept such a humble profile. I didn't realize what a senior devotee he was, or I was a little surprised to see how he was so close to Prabhupada. I didn't know the whole history of the movement at that time. I remember also some Indian guests came to see Prabhupada during one of these darshans. Prabhupada spoke to them a little, and I remember specifically him saying, give them some prasadam when they left. I was struck by that Prabhupada was concerned they get some prasadam. There's also one incident which I've described in my book Jai Srila Prabhupada under the title An Unforgettable Memory, when Prabhupada looked right through me. That also happened in his darshan room at the manor. At the end of one of these darshans, I gave a little gift to Prabhupada. I saw that different devotees were giving Prabhupada many nice gifts. I was a penniless brahmachari, but I had remembered reading in the Nectar of Devotion that one should give the deity, one should offer to the deity something that is very dear to oneself. So I didn't have practically any possessions, but one thing that was dear to me was a small picture I had of Nandanishwar, the deity of Krishna in our central London temple. So I decided to give that to Prabhupada. Now, actually, I should have got the picture framed nicely and wrapped in some nice paper, but I didn't know any of these things of the etiquette. So different devotees were standing in line at the end of the darshan to offer their obeisances to Prabhupada. One devotee in front of me gave a flower. Then I gave this photo and offered my obeisances in this. I was hoping that Prabhupada might acknowledge it, but he didn't say anything. He just slightly nodded his head. My next memories of Srila Prabhupada are in India, where I went to attend the Mayapur Vrindavan Festival in 1976. I had contracted hepatitis from a devotee who had returned from Africa to England with hepatitis, and I first felt the effects of that while on the plane going from England to India. Hepatitis is a very debilitating disease, so I was very sick and weak during the Mayapur section of the festival especially, and my only memories of Prabhupada in Mayapur at that time was of myself being in a large temple room packed with devotees listening to Srila Prabhupada giving class. Next, in Vrindavan, also Prabhupada was giving class. The Prabhupada was lecturing all this time on the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, which hadn't been published at that time. Prabhupada was working on translating it, and he was also translating it from it. And the devotees were saying, I think it was Harikesh Maharaj said that Prabhupada is completely absorbed in the mood of Prahlad Maharaj. Prabhupada was speaking on the section, the Prahlad Prakyan. So Harikesh Maharaj, I think it was, noted that Prabhupada is in the mood of Prahlad Maharaj, that mood of compassion for the fallen living beings and wanting to save them, preach to them. So I remember Prabhupada giving the class. He would chant Radha Madhava. The temple room there is somewhat smaller, so I was able to get somewhat closer to Prabhupada. Still not very close. But you could see Prabhupada chanting Jai Radha Madhava, shaking his head in great concentration as he chanted. Incomparable. And Nitai Chand, who was a young brahmachari at that time and quite trim looking at that time, he would stand on Prabhupada's right hand side and play the Mridanga in a very intricate manner, stand there looking very grand. I remember Prabhupada spoke on many things during the festival, but I particularly remember I was somewhat shocked at how directly and strongly Prabhupada was speaking in one particular lecture, which I've looked up in the Srimad Bhagavatam lecture book. This is a lecture on Canto 7 of Srimad Bhagavatam, Chapter 9, Text 47, on April the 2nd, 1976. Prabhupada was talking about how it's not possible to imitate great devotees like Haridas Thakur and go away and chant on one's own. Prabhupada said that that's not possible for us to do. We have to engage in some active service. He was recommending we should work actively for understanding Krishna. Particularly he mentioned about book distribution. Now, as far as I remember, this was on the day that we were all scheduled to go on parikrama by bus to Radha Kund. So that particularly struck me how Prabhupada was speaking very strongly about that. It means the devotees they'd attend a class in the morning, all the time of program, and they go by bus to different places, and Prabhupada wouldn't go with them, but some senior devotees who are familiar with Vrindavan would speak about some of the pastime places, and mostly we'd read from Prabhupada's books. We didn't get into talking about so many different pastimes, but mostly everything that was told was on the basis of Prabhupada's books in those days. So Prabhupada was warning like that, and I'd heard, this could be checked, but I'd heard that Prabhupada had said that if you think you can sit in one place and chant, you said you cannot do that. You'll simply eat and sleep and think of women and money and fall down. Prabhupada had said, I'd heard this, Prabhupada had said this at this festival, warning devotees not to be lured into the kind of Babaji life that they saw devotees practicing in Vrindavan. So Prabhupada said there are already so many monkeys and hogs and dogs in Vrindavan. Don't you become another one of them. He said, don't act like a monkey. Don't try to jump over your spiritual master. At that festival also, Prabhupada held a big initiation ceremony. There's a photo of that in Transcendental Diary by Hari Shauri Prabhu, I think volume 1, in which I was seated in the front row. There are many devotees present. There are many devotees who were getting initiated. I got Gayatri initiation, and many devotees were initiated. Many other devotees were present. I was held in the courtyard of Krishna Balaram Temple, which was practically full. Now I remember it was a hot sun. This was early April, and the sun was quite hot, and Akshayananda Swami was doing the fire sacrifice, and Prabhupada was sitting on his microphone. Prabhupada was sitting on his Vyasasan, and I was surprised how, especially Akshayananda could tolerate sitting next to the hot fire in the hot sun. That time I wasn't accustomed to the hot sun in India. Anyway, the whole sacrifice was going on with swaha, this, that. All of a sudden, Prabhupada leaned forward and spoke into the microphone and said, "Stop!" And the whole the swaha, everything stopped. Prabhupada pointed to the back of the courtyard, to one young lady devotee Western, those days almost all our devotees were Westerners, who had a small child with her. The child was maybe less than 1 year old, certainly not more than 2. The Prabhupada said, this child has his hand in his mouth. He is contaminating the whole sacrifice. Take him out, wash his hand, and teach him not to put his hand in his mouth. Continue. Then all the swaha and everything continued again. Now, as there are many initiates, Gayatri initiates, Prabhupada was giving just a few people. He was personally giving the mantra to everybody, but just a few every day. And I think it was a week or more before I finally got my initiation mantra from Prabhupada. I'd sat in the sacrifice, but I was still waiting to get the mantras. So I was waiting with a group of devotees, and then one by one they went in, and I was the last, and then Pushta Krishna Swami, who was Prabhupada's secretary at that time, said, Prabhupada's not seeing anyone today. Come again tomorrow. So I was disappointed. And then Pushta Krishna seemed to reconsider, and he went in, saw Prabhupada again, he told me to go in. I was the last one in that group. Before I went in, Pushta Krishna told me to remove some neck beads I was wearing. The current fashion at that time among devotees, there were ISKCON fashions in those days also, was to wear these black earthen beads from Radha Kund. Pushta Krishna told to take them off because he said Prabhupada didn't like them. So I went into Prabhupada's room, and amazingly, I was alone with Prabhupada. So I bowed down before Prabhupada, and Prabhupada told me to raise my right arm, and he put the thread on me. And I was a little slow in understanding what Prabhupada wanted me to do, and it seemed like Prabhupada seemed to think I was a little foolish. I was, of course, very nervous being alone with Prabhupada. Then Prabhupada gave me a sheet with the words written of the mantras, and he told me to repeat them after him, and he started to say them. Oh, another thing he told me, first of all, he was telling me how to sit. He wanted me to sit in exactly the right position and exactly the right distance, and he had to tell me about 3-4 times to get it right, and then he told me to put my arm up, and somehow I was very nervous, and Prabhupada seemed a little impatient, and seemed to think I was quite stupid, which of course I was. So then he gave me the sheet and started to say the words one by one. Now I had prided myself upon being quite good in Sanskrit pronunciation, so I was a little peeved when almost every word Prabhupada corrected my pronunciation, sometimes 2 or 3 times, but then after going through 1 or 2 mantras, Prabhupada stopped correcting me, like he seemed to think it was kind of like a hopeless case, and just let me go on with my mispronunciations. So then we went through the whole 7 mantras, and Prabhupada showed me how to count with the fingers, holding the thread, and told me to chant these mantras 3 times a day, morning, noon, and evening. And Prabhupada asked, do you have any question? Now, myself and some other devotees had heard. Myself and Satyabharka, my godbrother, we joined more or less the same time in London. And we were friends on book distribution, and we'd come together to India, having been promised that the top 2 book distributors could come to the Mayapur festival. So we were together in India also, and we'd heard that in the Hari Bhakti Vilas it said there are so many rules for chanting Gayatri. You should chant within a certain time of the sunrise and sunset, and the certain time when the sun's between the sun reaching the meridian and again coming down from it. It should be quite exact about the time when you chant your Gayatri, and there are different rules. Standing or sitting at different times, facing in different directions, which direction your thumb should be in, whereabouts the position of your hand at different times during the day. We were quite excited by hearing all these things. We thought it was something very wonderful, getting this mystical Gayatri mantra, and there are so many different rules which we hadn't seen anyone following, but we thought that it might be something very wonderful if we could learn all these rules and follow them. So when Prabhupada asked me, do you have any question? Then, because I wanted to ask about all these different rules about the direction you faced in and the exact timing. So first of all I asked Prabhupada, when should we chant these mantras? And Prabhupada had just told me morning, noon and evening. But my intention was to find out exactly when. So Prabhupada looked at me a little surprised, because he just told me, chant morning, noon and evening. And then I asked him, when should we chant? And Prabhupada said, morning, noon and evening. But then I persisted and said, but Prabhupada, is there any exact time when we should chant? Prabhupada looked at me and sternly said, morning, noon and evening. After that, I didn't want to ask any more questions about these intricacies of chanting Gayatri Mantra. I simply said, yes, Srila Prabhupada, and feeling very foolish, which I was, I offered my obeisances and left his room. Then I went, after the festival, I went back to England, but in August 1977, I came back to India with Trivikram Swami with the intention of staying in India for preaching, which more or less I did, although of course I spent many years in Bangladesh and different places in Southeast Asia. I more or less stayed in the India area. Anyway, after arriving in Delhi, before long, we were on a bus to Vrindavan to take darshan of Prabhupada, which we did very briefly. I have very little memory of that darshan. I was still jet-lagged and bus-shaken, and I didn't realize my great good fortune in seeing Prabhupada. I didn't know that I would hardly be seeing him again. So, after quickly going for darshan, we went back to Delhi and on with service. The last darshan I had of Prabhupada was in October of 1977. Just about 1 month before Prabhupada left. I had been with the BBT Library Party, which was just winding up its activities in India. We were in Allahabad, and Yagya, the leader of the party, suddenly said, let's go and take darshan of Prabhupada. So we did. We drove pretty much all day, and in the evening, or early evening, arrived in Vrindavan. I was surprised how easy it was to go into Prabhupada's room. There are quite a lot of devotees there, and there was sweet kirtan going on. But I was surprised to see Prabhupada. I'd never seen him looking so weak and thin, and I'd never expected him to be looking like that. If it had been any other person, anyone would have said that this is a person who's about to leave their body. But in Prabhupada's case, but seeing Prabhupada myself, and as much as I know most other devotees, we never thought that Prabhupada was going to leave. So in one sense we weren't so disturbed by seeing Prabhupada that we thought it was some kind of leela, and that Prabhupada was going to recover and lead this movement. It was amazing, even though Prabhupada was lying on the bed, he wasn't eating, but we never could imagine that Prabhupada would leave. We just didn't think it was possible. It just didn't even enter our thoughts. There was no question of ISKCON without Prabhupada being personally there to lead us and guide us. Anyway, that evening, Prabhupada sat up in bed, which means he asked some of his disciples to lift him up and sit him up. And he took something to eat. I can't remember what it was. And he was going to take something to eat. And then before he took, he started saying Sharira Vidyajal, and he said the whole verse. And then instead of eating, he started lecturing to the devotees about how the senses are very dangerous. He was speaking very slowly, but with spiritual vigor. Now, I didn't know this until many years later, but actually this was the first time that Prabhupada had eaten anything for quite a few weeks. So this was quite an event. But what struck me was that Prabhupada, after he'd been preaching so many years all over the world, and here he was with so many senior devotees from all over the world in Vrindavan, and he was still preaching the most basic thing, that we have to control the senses. That made an impression on me. However, the next morning I left Vrindavan to join the book distribution, to go to Bengal to join the book distribution mission there. Subsequently spent several years in West Bengal, in Bengal, both in West Bengal and Bangladesh. I never physically saw Prabhupada again. Because we have been trained to serve the Vani of Prabhupada, and knowing that Prabhupada liked book distribution very much, we felt connected to Prabhupada in executing services in his mission. I personally felt the presence of Prabhupada very strongly sometimes when I was in Bangladesh, when I had no real association, sometimes for weeks on end, under very difficult circumstances. In those difficulties, I often felt that Prabhupada was with me, and that was the only thing that helped me to keep on going. Particularly, I remember after one very difficult trip, I'd been traveling alone, and there'd been many, many difficulties, compounded by the lack of association. There's so many difficulties preaching in Bangladesh at that time, which is not really within the scope of this book to get into. But I remember coming back on a crowded, but going back to Dhaka, the capital city where we had our center after being out for some time, alone preaching, and it was an all-day bus journey over bumpy roads in the heat, with a very noisy bus, with people talking loudly and smoking, and goats and chickens in the bus, and I was also feeling sick. I'd been very sick before. And suddenly I thought, why am I doing this? And for a little time I was bewildered. Why am I doing this? And then I remember that I'm doing this for Srila Prabhupada. And then all the difficulties seemed as if insignificant. Rather, it seemed like it was a great privilege to be able to go. Another thing about the bus, it was so crowded. People sitting right on top of you, smoking in your face. So I remember it was a great thinking. Actually, it's worth doing this. Prabhupada went through so many difficulties to save us. So if we go through some minor difficulties to please him, then that is a great privilege. Another way we see Srila Prabhupada, even now, is seeing ISKCON as Prabhupada said. Prabhupada said, ISKCON is my body. So we always have to remember that this International Society for Krishna Consciousness is non-different from Srila Prabhupada, and how much Srila Prabhupada wanted this ISKCON movement to be successful. So there have been and continue to be, and no doubt there will be many discrepancies and difficulties within ISKCON, especially without the personal, without Prabhupada to personally chastise us and keep us all in order. We sometimes tend to forget exactly what Prabhupada wanted us to do and how he wanted us to do things. And sometimes life in ISKCON has been unnecessarily very, very difficult, but when we remember that Srila Prabhupada considers ISKCON to be non-different from him, then despite all ups and downs, we remember that we have to go on serving within ISKCON and cooperating with all the followers of Srila Prabhupada to try to make his mission a great success, as it surely will be if we always remember that Srila Prabhupada is always with us, particularly in the form of his books, and that if we follow his instructions without deviating from them, inventing anything, changing anything, then we will get all the blessings of Srila Prabhupada, and through him all the blessings of the Guru Parampara, and we will never be separated from him. So our memories of Srila Prabhupada are not just these personal anecdotes which have their own particular sweetness and value, but our whole life from now into time immemorial should be always remembering Prabhupada. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, always think of me. We cannot but think of Krishna. We cannot think of Krishna without thinking about Prabhupada, because it was Prabhupada who gave us Krishna. So we are inextricably linked with Srila Prabhupada eternally. We don't want anything except we don't even want Krishna consciousness without Prabhupada. For us who have come in ISKCON, there's no meaning to Krishna consciousness without Prabhupada.